Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Today we have with us Prabir Purkaista, and we will be discussing about the recent ceasefire breakdown that happened in Syria. So Prabir, why do you think that happened? What led to it?
Well, this is a breakdown after only 7 days. After 7 days, there was supposed to be a renewal of the ceasefire, and this ceasefire would then continue for a much longer duration. It broke down the 7 days primarily because one of the conditions of the ceasefire was that the Americans would get the Free Syrian Army, or those groups which are aligned to the Americans, to separate itself from the Jabhat al-Nusra, which has renamed itself, but I am not going to get into that, which are really officially a part of al-Qaeda. So Americans had agreed that Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, or IS, whatever we want to call it, are the ones who need to be isolated and fought. This is something Americans have resisted for quite some time. They did not want Jabhat al-Nusra to be identified as an enemy, in spite of the fact that Security Council has identified both these forces that need to be fought, mainly because Jabhat al-Nusra and the Free Syrian Army, which the Americans back, have been fighting together as allies against the Bashar al-Assad government. So given that, for a long time, the bone of contention between the Russian side and the Syrians and the Americans on the other hand was that you have to separate the Free Syrian Army from Jabhat al-Nusra. If you don't do that, we cannot then say we will not bomb the Free Syrian Army, because they are essentially together. So it doesn't make any sense. And the earlier ceasefire also had some of these conditions, that they will identify which of them will fight, which is fighting with Jabhat al-Nusra, and others will withdraw, but that didn't happen. But there was no condition that they will be separated, that the Americans will ensure the separation between the two. This time, explicitly, the ceasefire, there was a condition that they will separate the other forces, rebel forces, from Jabhat al-Nusra, and the other rebel forces and the Syrian army would get into a situation of ceasefire. This was the condition of ceasefire. There would be no ceasefire against the Jabhat al-Nusra or the ISIS or IS, whichever name we want to call it.
So could you explain a little more about what new elements were there in this ceasefire, when this ceasefire broke down, compared to the earlier one which happened? So if you could elaborate on that.
The earlier ceasefire essentially had identified again Jabhat al-Nusra and the ISIS forces that have to be fought, though it had not explicitly given that the Americans will separate the two forces, these Free Syrian Army forces from Jabhat al-Nusra. But what happened is the 4 or 5 month ceasefire that the Syrians maintained, and the Russians also pulled back in that period, led to Americans essentially rearming the Free Syrian Army and using them as a conduit to supply essentially arms to also Jabhat al-Nusra and some of to ISIS as well. So essentially Americans used the Free Syrian Army as a conduit to rearm the opposition, including Jabhat al-Nusra, against the Syrian forces, Syrian government forces. Finally, the ceasefire broke down because the sectarian, Islamist sectarian forces which are fighting the Syrian government forces, and really the Free Syrian Army is essentially consisting of Islamist sectarian forces, what is called al-Qaeda light rather than al-Qaeda itself, but they are not significantly different in what they want. They want a Sunni sectarian state, they want essentially a Sharia as the law, they don't want any secular constitution, and it's very doubtful whether other constituents of the Syrian state today who are not Sunni, who could be Alawite, who could be secular, or who are Christians, they would be allowed to stay on in this state except as second-class citizens. So it's not very clear what these forces want.
So the recent attempted coup in Turkey, how has that affected or changed the relationship between Turkey, Russia, Syria and America? How has that impacted the entire situation?
I think there has been a very significant shift of the Turkish government vis-a-vis the Americans and the Russians and the Syrian government. As we know earlier, Turkey was fully backing the rebels against the Syrian Arab Syrian government. That was very clear from the beginning, that one of the most strident opponents of the Syrian government was really Turkey, and it used its borders for free flow of arms as well as free flow of what are called the foreign elements, foreign jihadi elements to enter Syria. So both were being used to fight against the Syrian government, and also they provided a safe hinterland. They could fight and then go back to Turkey, rest, and come and fight again. So this is the role Turkey was playing as a frontline state against the Syrian government forces. So after the recent coup, I think Turkey has changed its position vis-a-vis Russia, because as you know, after the shooting down of the Sukhoi aircraft by Turkey, Russia had almost gone into a cold hostilities, as if you will, against Turkey. They had stopped certain economic relations, they stopped tourists, they had stopped importing certain Turkish products. So they had actually used their economic card against Turkey, as well as threatened Turkey that if it wants to support any of the activities militarily in Syria, they would not allow that to happen. But after the attempted coup, when the Turkey has felt that it is CIA who backed the coup, Gulen, who is in asylum in the United States, was in exile in the United States. The Gulenist forces were behind the coup. Given that, Turkey seems to have had a rapprochement with Russia, and therefore Turkey has now agreed that even if it enters Syria, it will do so in a limited way, and it will not support the forces like Jabhat al-Nusra who are fighting in Aleppo, and they will stop their advance at a certain point. Their main interest at the moment is to see that the Kurds don't create Rojava, which would be a linking up of the Afrin canton, which they already have control over, and Kobane, which is on the east of the Euphrates River, that there is a 90-kilometer zone which was not under Kurdish control, the YPG control, and that YPG was trying to close. So Turkey did not want that to happen, and the Russians and the Syrians seem to have agreed that if Turkey comes in, stops that from happening, takes over that area from IS, then they would, as long as they did not come down further south, they would be okay with it. And Turkey seems to have agreed that it will not explicitly now support the rebel forces against the Syrian government. Now, how far this will hold, how far this will continue, we don't know. But this is the shift that Turkey seems to have made vis-a-vis Russia and the Syrian government, and it seems to have distanced itself from the American government.
So it was recently in the news, America bombed their Assad, and they claim it to be a mistake, but what are your views on it? Why do you think that happened?
I think it's a very, very difficult incident to understand. Honestly, here is Deir ez-Zor, which has been under siege for almost 2.5 years or even longer. Its only supply is from the airport, which the military planes come in and they provide supplies to Deir ez-Zor city through this lifeline of the airport. This is a mountainous region overlooking the airport, which gives in some sense fire control over the airport and prevents the ISIS from attacking the airport and stopping the supplies. This has been under Syrian army control for at least the last 6 months. It's very difficult to understand why the Americans would not know that, because this was not a recent change in area. This is not something that happened just recently. The Syrian army took over this, and therefore the Americans did not know that. Secondly, the Americans have really detailed view of the terrain of Deir ez-Zor, because they have eyes in the sky, they have drones in the area, they have aircraft in the area, so they really know what's happening in that area. It's very difficult to understand that this is something which they really had no clue that the ISIS was not there. The second part of it, it was not a small, it's not 1 or 2 bombs that fell in over here. There was a sustained bombardment which led to about nearly 100 soldiers getting killed. The immediate report said about 82 soldiers got killed, but the casualties are actually supposed to be higher, and heavy equipment. a lot of the heavy equipment in Deir ez-Zor was concentrated in this area, which was also lost, including tanks, artillery, and so on. And just after this attack, the ISIS launched a full-scale attack on that mountain region, and some reports indicate they have captured a part of that mountain region, and therefore Deir ez-Zor airport now is under threat or may be lost to the Syrian army control. If that happens, Deir ez-Zor is going to fall. So this is a very serious strategic mistake.
So recently a UN convoy was bombed. Do you think the Russians or the Syrians were somehow involved with it?
Well, that's the American claim, that the Russians and the Syrian government were involved in the bombing. They mainly blame the Russians for it. This is an aid convoy under Syrian Red Crescent, equivalent of the Red Cross, and under UN supervision, which are supposed to reach supplies to Aleppo. Now, from the pictures that we see, it seems that they had stopped, they were parked at the side of the road, and when these were destroyed. Now, whether the destruction is with bombs from the sky, or whether it was incendiary weapons which were used, or was it that it was set on fire by some other military action, is not clear at the moment. The UN initially said that this was an air attack. Afterwards, UN withdrew from the statement and said there was an attack, some kind of an attack, but they withdrew the word air attack from their statement. So at the moment, it's very unclear who attacked them, what were the forces involved in the attack, and whether it was an air bombing at all or not. If it is not an air strike, then it's more likely to be the rebel forces. If it was an air strike, it's most probably then likely to be the Russian or the Syrian government forces. So it's not clear at the moment what is there.
So thank you, Prabir, for talking with us. And this is all the time we have at NewsClick. Thank you for watching.